day 4, hoping for a little bit better luck than the past couple of days. Heading to the far southwest corner of New Mexico. Got all these mountain ranges out here. Unfortunately, most of those are on private property. Bleh. But there's at least one where we do have a couple of access roads up into. And I'm hoping that the rain will have been good enough to break things out, but won't flood us out later, so fingers crossed. Pronghorn off the side of the road right here. Hey guys. And there they go. Second fastest land mammal on Earth.
The area we visited on this day is quite literally the most southwest, the very most bottom area of New Mexico you can possibly travel to. Right on the border with Arizona, right on the border with Mexico. The Palancillo Mountains that we were visiting is part of one of many kind of northern spurs of the Sierra Madre Occidental of Mexico that come up into the southwestern part of the U.S., bringing with them a lot of unique species that I was really hoping to find. These guys here, scrub jays, are a species that I don't see up at home. They're more of a desert southwest or west coast animal. Beautiful blue birds and quite noisy, but they often did not let us get very close, unlike some of the jays that I'm very used to, so we were stuck having to watch them from quite a distance. Now, as I've mentioned in some of the previous videos from down here, we arrived at kind of an awkward time, slightly after a number of big wildflowers have been burning in the state, but also just as or slightly before all the monsoons have come through. So while some of the wildflowers and such were sparse, the ones that were present were still absolutely beautiful. Like this one, the Chlicote or western coral bean, a species of legume found throughout Mexico and just barely coming up into New Mexico and Arizona. And it makes spikes of these brilliant crimson flowers on top of this rather sparse foliage. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, we were right on the border with both Arizona and almost Mexico. So this road that we were actually taking actually does cross over into the Arizona side, and it continues for a couple of hours before you hit the next city. So I don't have a permit to herp in Arizona, so we had to turn around, but we did stop to look at this landmark where they put up when this road was actually first built back in the 1930s, right, and then this was set right on the Arizona border. Alright, out here, right at the Arizona border, so we can't go any further that way. We can poke around over here in the Palancillos. In comparison to some of the other mountain ranges down here, the Palancillos are a relatively low range, so the most forest that they actually get right at the top is these rather sparse, scrubby, kind of pinyon oak forests, which they don't host a lot of shade per se, but there's enough trees and vegetative growth that it does provide environment for some rather interesting species up at the top. What we were really hoping for were either ridge-nosed rattlesnakes or the Tarahumara mountain king snake. Kind of missed out on those, unfortunately, but there was some really cool other wildlife. Some of these cacti, you can see the oaks growing around, longhorn beetles, the ever-present cicadas that gave us serenades all the way through, and eventually a few lizards. I think this is an ornate tree lizard. I'll have to double check when I get back to the book. But that's definitely a new species that I haven't seen before. Lots of lizards to be found out here. Hopefully we'll find the things that eat the lizards. Alright, managed to actually catch him, and kind of surprised by that actually, because he was about to duck under the rock. But you can see why they're called ornate, because they've got all this incredible pattern across them with different colors and chevrons. Helps them blend in with the rocks, of course, but as the name tree lizard suggests, they'll blend in with like the lichen and stuff that's running up this tree. So great for camouflage. Anyway, so we'll let him go. Right back on his rock where he was. Here you go, dude. Boy,
There you go.
So it turns out actually I have seen these guys before once, very briefly, when I was down in Big Bend National Park several years ago, but otherwise they don't live where I do, so I don't really have much opportunity to see them. However, they do have a fairly widespread range from roughly the edge of Arizona on the west, down through much of New Mexico, and over into western and central Texas. And as the name suggests, these guys do like to live in areas with at least short trees. They're usually found scampering up along the branches and the lower bark of the trees. Otherwise, they will be found in relatively rocky crevice areas where there's a lot of places they can duck away and hide. And like most lizards, they're active in the middle of the day when it's blazingly hot outside. That's when they do best, and they feed on any little insects that they can get a hold of. So as we moved up and away from the Arizona border back up towards the top of the Palencios, we managed to be lucky enough to actually come across this beautiful blooming cactus. I'm kind of surprised the flowers were open in the middle of the day, since they often open them up more at night for a lot of pollinators. And then as we continued up, there's actually a couple of trails that are made up in here, because this is actually national forest land that we were passing through. So it's open to the public if you have a vehicle that can get there. I really don't recommend taking the little Elantra type vehicles that, well, I drove up there. A little more clearance is a bit wiser. But there's some trails that you can actually take that are up here that will wind up through the forest and such. We actually passed by one spot where we were. It had a hive of bees that made their home in one of the hollows of an oak tree. I'm pretty convinced that this is probably a hive of killer bees, unfortunately, the Africanized honeybees, because while I was stopping at the car waiting for Nathan, one of them just decided to sting me, and then they all followed me, so I had to dive back into the car really quick. This trail actually leads up out of the more forested bottoms of the canyons and up onto the drier hillside. Nathan went up higher than I did, and so decided to take advantage of shooting photos of me down below, along with catching a few things like this western kingbird. While I poked around down below, I found some really huge grasshoppers, and then a couple of lizards poking around. I found one down here, and then Nathan went up further to find a couple of others. That lizard I was never able to actually identify, one of the plateau or prairie lizards or one of their relatives. This one, which Nathan got a photo of, is a little bit easier. This is a desert grassland whiptail, which is one of the more, I'd say, perfectly striped ones down there. A lot of the other whiptail species found in the same area have rather unusually like spotted or kind of checkered patterns, so this one is pretty distinct among them. Anyway, after we found these guys, we kept moving up into the mountains, crossing out of the relatively pristine environment into areas that had been hit by a bit of fire. Down here we tried finding places that were relatively untouched by the fire, and in a couple spots there were little patches of things that were managing to grow back up, including what I believe is this Penstemon barbatus, one of the brilliantly red penstemon found in the state. As one can imagine, in recently burned areas, animals are somewhat sparse to find on the ground, particularly the reptiles, but we did manage to find a couple of things shortly. The dearth of reptiles soon stopped with a beautiful female prairie lizard.
We got a little, maybe one of the plateau lizards or something else. This is a big gravid female too, actually.
running around out here, which is good because they need some repopulation after the big fire that went through here. I'll have to double check which species this is later. Yeah, so this is a nice gravid female. There's a number of species of like the plateau and prairie lizards, or the subspecies, and some of the relatives, some of the spiny lizards and such. I don't think this is a spiny lizard, but I'll have to double check looking at some of these patterns and such once I get back to the book. But it's a really good thing that we've got gravid females out here, because they definitely need some help repopulating this area. And hopefully, where she is, still hoping we'll find something that eats these guys out here too. Alright, so we'll put her right back by the rock where she was. There you go. Yep, under you go. So yeah, when it comes to lizards, and especially when it comes to this particular group of lizards, I always have to come back and recheck what information I have on them. And it's a good thing I did too, because as it turns out, this is actually a pretty special find. The striped plateau lizards, their northernmost distribution is basically the Animas, the Palencia, and Chiricahua Mountains, right in the southwest and southeast corners of New Mexico and Arizona, respectively. They don't come any further, and they're only found in isolated mountaintop areas, basically further south in the Sierra Madre Occidental. So they're relatively similar to the other species, of course, being small, kind of chunky. They've got the stripes down their sides. This species, though, lacks the blue belly patches that a lot of the other Sceloporus species have, and only in like the springtime, you can kind of see it fading on the female here, do they develop these blue patches right underneath the throat. Much more prominent in males, of course, just barely there in females. So after we released her, we continued poking around a bit. This particular patch, there was some water down in kind of the bottom of the creek area, which attracted some more of the red satyr butterflies, and then we kept moving on, getting further into basically the heart of where the fire had gone through, because that's where the only road is. You can see the impact all around the area. We did stop at a slightly more vegetated area. I climbed up to the top, and here, found the very first snake of the trip. You can probably just barely see him. Tip of his nose in there. There's a whip snake in that hole. Don't know if it's Sonoran or striped. There he is. So I don't know if you guys can see him, but there's either a Sonoran or a striped whip snake underneath this rock here. There he is. Unfortunately, the camera doesn't want to focus on him, and I can't get him to come out. There he is. No focus, camera. He's right there, come on. There you are. It's probably the only shot we'll be able to get of him, but at least he's on camera. And indeed, it was the only shot. I barely got a glimpse of this almost 4-foot snake diving under the rock as I climbed up to the top of the ridge, and then he only came out this far again after waiting almost 45 minutes hoping he would come out. So I'm pretty sure this is a Sonoran whipsnake because it's got a bit of a blockier head than the striped whipsnake does, but of course I would only really be able to tell if I could have seen the rest of him a little more clearly. Both species kind of just barely collide. The Sonoran whipsnake is the one that is more likely, more common down in this far southwest corner. A little bit further north they're kind of replaced by the striped whipsnakes. Both species, though, are, as a general rule, as the name might suggest, really fast, really skinny animals that it's really hard to get a hand on or even decent photos of because they're usually gone before you even realize they're there. Okay, we'll see if we can spot him here again. There's a very, very tiny scorpion right there. No idea what species. Got some pretty big pinchers, so I wouldn't be too worried about him. But probably need to scoot him out from under the rocks so that I don't squish him when I put it back down.
And here we have a much larger scorpion. That could be a bark scorpion too, so we'll leave him be under his rock after he moves out of the way so I don't squish him.
At this point it was hitting late afternoon, so we started to head down out of the mountains to avoid, there were some more storms that were predicted to start coming up and over the range soon. So as we came down out of the mountains and back into the valley between the Animus and Palencios, we found some turkeys, as well as took some time to take some photographs of the massive flowering yuccas that were in the area. All the plants were in brilliant bloom at this time. These guys are also really special. If you don't know, most yucca species have a one-to-one relationship with specific species of yucca moths. Each cannot live without the other. The yucca requires the moth to pollinate it, and then the moth requires the actual yucca seed pods to lay its eggs in order for the larva to develop. So they must require each other. Most species, they only work with one other species of the paired up organism, and so if one gets lost, the other will die out as well.
Just doing some video.
Is it two males or? I think it is two young males. Huh.
I got video of both, so
Cool.
This might well be some of the closest shots that we got of the pronghorn the whole trip, and funnily enough also the closest we ever were to the Mexico border. We were within a couple of miles of it. Down here, the pronghorn of course don't recognize borders, so they naturally cross back and forth between the two countries, much like many other species do, so any barriers preventing that also cause a splitting of the populations, which can be really bad for the genetic diversity. So a lot of people confuse these with antelope, often calling them the American antelope, and it's actually not true at all. These guys are actually closer related to things like giraffes and okapi, and their last relative shared with actual antelope split from them almost 50 million years ago, so they are the last of their own unique lineage.
Catch something?
no, he's just staring specifically at us. Looks like he's looking around for prey.
So this might be one of the most widespread raptor species in North America, but it's still really cool to see one land on the hillside, maybe 100 feet away. This guy, yeah, he was actually sitting on what looked like some old dumpsters, trash bins that were right next to the road, and then he flew off up onto the side of the hill as we started to come up in the car, and then he just sat there staring at us until we drove off.
Start moving the car up.
So for those unaware also, the wild North American turkeys, many of the subspecies, were actually basically wiped out up into the 1900s, and only a handful of birds of a couple of different subspecies still existed in kind of the eastern, southeastern parts of the US. So from those birds, they gathered up the wild turkeys and started breeding them heavily to reintroduce. So a lot of the birds that you see all the way across the US, particularly in the west, like out here, they're not actually the native subspecies, and in some places they actually never really existed there. We've just kind of spread their range out. Anyway, after we pass these guys, you might notice there's a lot of vegetation down in this valley too, really thick grass and brush, and a lot of cottonwoods in some areas. Down in the desert southwest, you might not expect that, but it became pretty obvious the reason why these were able to live around here shortly later, as we came up on a road that I should have filmed where the storms that had passed through earlier had rained so much that the road was completely flooded, 20 feet across with water. We had thought we were stranded actually, but luckily one of the local ranchers happened to come by at that time and informed us that it looked deep, but really all that water was only about a foot deep. The mud on either side was more of an issue, so we managed to get across that and unfortunately found a dead blackneck garter snake, but continued up the road to find a little bit more live wildlife.
Another tarantula out on the road. There's been quite a few of these guys. Why are these guys out though and not the reptiles? Good grief. You should get off the road, sir. So yeah, when you drive down to the desert, you don't really expect gigantic rainstorms to be on the itinerary. But it looks like the monsoons arrived early and hard.
Now, although the rainstorms definitely made it hard to look for reptiles in a number of places, and of course also washed out a bunch of the roads, it did make for some amazingly beautiful sunsets, and just as the sun was going down, brought out some of the other wildlife that we were really hoping to find down here.
I got something out here tonight. Grab the headlamp. There you are. What are you? Oh. Looks like a green toad. That's cool. Alright. Well, we've got ourselves a spadefoot toad has come out in the storm, so at least something has decided this rain is good for them. I'm not entirely sure which of the spadefoot toads this is. There's a couple of different species that we might find down here, but I'm going to guess probably couches, but we'll double check it. I'll put the correct label on there. These guys are called spadefoot toads. You can see how he's trying to dig into my hand. They've got these little hard shovel-like spades on the backs of their hind feet that they use to dig down into the dirt. He's trying to do that right now to get away from me. So we'll get him off the side of the road where he was going. There you go, dude. Jump, jump. Yep, there you go. Very nice.
This is one of the spadefoot toad species that we supposedly have in Colorado down in the southeast corner that I've been trying to look for and have never been able to find. Down here, as soon as the rains were out, along with all the others, they were everywhere. Now, the Couch's spadefoot toad, it's one of the cutest ones, I think. They've got those really funky, big eyes with the vertical pupils, and they've got some really variable colors. This one was brilliantly green, and they're not true toads, like some of the other species, like the woodhouses or Great Plains toads, we'll get to those later, which have these distinct parotid glands right behind their eyes that secrete toxins. These guys don't have those, and they also have much larger, hard, black, spade-like growths on the backs of their feet that I was talking about. He was trying to dig into my hands. Those they use to dig down under the soil once the rains have passed and allow them to survive through the really hot, dry periods that exist through most of the desert time. And then they come out and they breed explosively whenever these big rainstorms come through and make puddles big enough to last more than a couple of weeks, which is all they need for their larvae to actually develop fully.
So there's another of these guys. Oh, come here, dude. Get you off the road here. Huh? Yep. Alright, so this might actually be a Mexican spadefoot toad. A little bit different colors, little spots on his back. Definitely a different species from the other one that we just saw, though. So, new guy here. So I think he's going across the road, so we'll get him over there. And then there was another one, actually, that was just behind the car. We'll see if we can find him, too.
Now, there are two you could call smaller and kind of gray-brown spadefoot toads that you can find down here. One is the Mexican, the other is the plain spadefoot toad, which has a little bit more pattern sometimes, but the other way you can really tell them apart is that the plain spadefoot toad, unlike the Mexican and the Couch's, has this odd little bony bump or boss right between its eyes. These guys don't have those. And also you'll find me throughout this video here kind of mistaking these guys for babies of other spadefoot toads because I wasn't really sure how big they actually got. Turns out the Mexican spadefoots breed at a fairly small size. They don't get anywhere near as big as like the couches do.
There you go.
Let's ride another of these guys out here again. This was the other guy that was on the road. He had big eyes because it's nighttime. He's working on naturally using very little light out here. So hopefully my having the light on him won't mess him up too much. But he was heading in that direction as well, so we'll move on.
Another beautiful couches spadefoot toad. This guy a little bit less green, a little bit more pattern. You'll see more variety coming up too.
Yet another little baby. We'll get him across the road here. Don't worry about the photos on this one.
Okay.
We'll just get him across the road. And off that way, dude. Yep, that way. There you go. Careful.
Do a video.
Alright, got a little baby here. I'll have to definitely check with the metamorphs, but I'm pretty sure this is a young Couch's spadefoot toad. Those eyes kind of give it away in part, but also kind of the speckled pattern that he's got that's just developing. So this might have been one that was produced either very early this year or last year, and he's just starting to grow up. And he'll be another year or two before he's mature. So we're just going to put him down here because he was jumping actually towards this side of the road. So
One of the rare cases where what I thought was baby was actually a baby. So yeah, these guys, they start out really small. The tadpoles are only an inch or two long, and then as they metamorphose, they take several years to mature, especially if they hit like several dry, hot seasons in a row where they don't get as much food in between the monsoon rains.
we have another new species here. This looks like the Great Plains toad, which we have seen on different videos before, but still cool to find. Alright, we've got another species out here. Great Plains toad. These guys we have seen in Colorado, but not down here before. There's a couple of unique subspecies of some of the other common toads we see in Colorado as well that are also only found down here. But these guys, same species, same subspecies. I don't think they have any. They just range across a massive region of the plains and then down into the southwest as well. This might be coming up on kind of their western edge of their range too. So I'm not really sure which direction he was heading, but we'll probably get him over to the other side of the road since he was kind of facing that way.
So up in my neck of the woods, the Great Plains toad is a lot rarer than the Woodhouse's toad, its close relative. But down here, it's possibly even more common. I certainly saw more than I did the Woodhouses. And this is a species with a massive range. It is found, it kind of loops up into southern central Utah, down all the way through the Sonoran Desert, well into Mexico, out across much of the Great Plains, through Oklahoma and Texas. So these guys are found basically everywhere. Some of the ways you can recognize them is they usually have these really cool kind of paired dark markings on either side of that stripe down their back, and on top of their head they have this really prominent kind of crest just above either eye that runs from across the nose down behind the eye, kind of connecting to those big parotid glands.
This guy who's running away. That's a big old Great Plains toad. Look at you. You've just come out of the dirt. Alright, dude. Let's get you put across the road, shall we?
Now, the other Great Plains toad that we just showed could have possibly been confused with the Woodhouses with the much darker, less distinct markings. This guy, really clear, those really bright, perfectly paired markings and really interesting colors across his back. You don't confuse this with really any other species down here.
Got a bunch of little babies here. Or maybe not quite babies, but gonna move them across. Look at them all. Over here, you guys. Okay? Go on. Go that way.
Now at this point, my travel partner Nathan probably was ready to just kind of hit the hay, call it a day, head to a hotel, but I could have spent all night just picking up every toad on the road and trying to get it across. Unfortunately, with the hundreds, if not thousands, that we saw. There were quite a few that also we did not get to in time and were squished, but many a times we were stopping and I would collect just handfuls of, especially these smaller Mexican spadefoots, and try and move them all across the road, and you could hear my hands just chirping away as they're trying to get on with their business.
Large toad. Let's see what he is. It is another Great Plains toad. Look at you. Sir, you should, yes. No, come here. Let us take a moment to look at you, shall we? You are handsome. You might be female, actually, since you are not screaming to let me have me let you go. Here you go, dude. Run away. So this might be a new species. Look at you. Look at that. That might be good. I'll have to double check, but this might actually be our Sonoran toad. It's a young one if it is, and those parotid glands, huge parotid glands, will continue to expand as he grows up. Adult Sonoran toads have almost no pattern whatsoever on them, so all these little dots kind of disappear. And these are one of the most toxic toads in North America. But I'm pretty sure that is definitely one of them, because those parotids are just massive compared to any others. Sir, where are you going? Well, we'll get him across the road since he's in a hurry now, so we'll put him over here.
And I am still of the opinion that this was the best find of the night, especially because right where we were, this is the easternmost edge of their range. They do not go any further into New Mexico than basically right where we were, just past the western border with Arizona. This is our largest native toad, right behind the rare pockets of native cane toads that you do find down in South Texas. These guys get huge, almost 7 inches long, and as adults they have almost no pattern whatsoever, kind of a blank brown or olive green color, and they get these really big warts on their back legs, as well as those huge parotids that kind of continue to expand, and then almost no pattern whatsoever. When they're young, they have these little spots, and then as they grow up, they kind of develop this patchy network of that olive green that kind of expands out until they're just solid colored. And this is the species that is often referred to in some circles as the psychedelic toad, because their toxins are extremely powerful and do contain some hallucinogens. This unfortunately has made them a target for a few unscrupulous groups. Luckily, this is a fairly widespread species and found in a lot of rather inhospitable areas that most people will not go down to for just a drug high. However, in the areas where they do come in contact with people fairly regularly, because they do like fairly permanent water areas, you will find they have a toxin that is powerful enough to sometimes fully paralyze or even kill small to medium-sized dogs. So, just like with any wild animal, it's best to teach your dog just to, if they find it, leave it alone. Do train your dog not to bother wildlife, both for the wildlife's safety and your dog's safety.
Alright, we've got another guy out here. Who are you? Oh, look at you! That is definitely a Couch's spadefoot. That is a gorgeous animal. Look at that pattern. Beautiful.
As I mentioned earlier, the Couch's spadefoots are really variable in pattern and color, and our last toad for the night, this guy, certainly the most heavily patterned that we found that night.
Alright, so another day that didn't quite go as planned, but thanks to the storms tonight, at least we finished strong with a lot of really cool new toad species. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and we'll see what happens tomorrow. Hopefully we'll start finding some snakes out and about. There's going to be a couple more mountain ranges that we'll be checking out. But until then, as always, you guys can find out more online at carltoncarnivores.com. If you'd like to support videos like this, consider joining us at www.patreon.com/hcarlton. Members there get special benefits and things back. As always, there's the website and shop at carltoncarnivores.com, including the link to the Teespring shop where we have our merchandise like t-shirts and mugs and things like that. If you just want to see more photos and videos and so on, you can always find me at on social media, Carlton Carnivores on Facebook, Instagram, even TikTok. And until next time, I'm Hawk and Carlton. And this is Carlton Carnivores.